Hello again. I promised you some more Christmassy reads. So these all have a winter theme, perhaps even a Christmas theme, but as you know, my taste for rather darker things. They're not necessarily terribly cheery, so they do tend to be on the crime fiction end of the spectrum. The first one is Das finstere Tal by Thomas Willmann, so The Dark Valley, by a German writer. So I was going to read it for German Lit Month and put it as a review there, but I just didn't get round to writing the review. It's been turned into a film as well, which I understand was filmed in Tyrol, I believe, in Austria, and it takes place in the Alps, in possibly the German Alps, in a remote valley. It's not so much the story itself, because actually after a while it becomes quite predictable. So there is this stranger who comes into the valley, an artist. He is not really welcomed by these people who are very cut off from the world, quite remote, quite happy to just keep themselves to themselves, not terribly friendly with strangers. But he gets to live in sort of lodgings with a family there, and gradually he discovers just why there is one family that seems to dominate over all the others in the valley, why everybody's afraid of speaking up against them, and I suppose he starts waging his own battle against them. It is very reminiscent of Shane, the story about the cowboy who comes into a young boy's life. So it definitely has a Wild West feel to it. But it's also got, it sort of plays a little bit on what the Austrians and Germans call the Heimatroman, which are these sort of provincial stories about life in certain parts of the country, in Austria, usually in the mountains, where life is still good. So a little bit of nostalgia, but obviously this is misplaced nostalgia in this case, because it really is quite grim. A lot of it reminded me also of Romanian realist fiction of the early 20th century, sort of early 1900s to 1914 perhaps, where they described the life of the peasant. And in 1907 there was a huge peasant revolt, where they actually stopped being treated quite like objects and had to be given certain rights. But until then there was very much a sort of feudal system still in place in many parts of Romania. So so a lot of writers took their side and tried to explain the peasant life, backward life, as many would say, and this is very much this kind of book. Another wintry book is Zen and the Art of Murder by Oliver Bottini, another German author, despite the name. It takes place in the sort of Black Forest region, so close to the border with France, and the detective inspector Louise Bonny is actually half French, half German, and she's a bit of a maverick, of course. She's alcoholic. She's about to be kicked off the force, or at least given sort of written warning for being alcoholic. But they discover this monk walking barefoot for miles and miles and miles in the snowy landscapes of the Black Forest. And something about him, and he seems to be terribly afraid of something but will not speak about it. He's Japanese and perhaps he cannot speak about it, he cannot talk about it, but maybe it has to do with his religious beliefs. So they believe that something's wrong, so they try to find the monastery that he's from, the Buddhist monastery that he comes from and discover a whole conspiracy that has to do with international smuggling, if you like, and child adoption rings and so on and so forth. So it is a crime story, fairly standard crime story. It is quite engaging. Not entirely sure about just how nuanced the understanding of Buddhism is, although the author is certainly trying very hard, so maybe I was just the wrong audience for it. This will be reviewed later for Crime Fiction Lover. It comes out in 2018. Another two that I reviewed for Crime Fiction Lover is Ragnar Jonasson Whiteout, the latest in the Dark Iceland series, which takes place in another very remote location, in a deserted village, and I won't even attempt to pronounce any of the Icelandic names. So it's a village that once existed. Now all of its inhabitants have gone. The only thing left there is a manor house and a lighthouse, and a young woman comes to visit them for Christmas. She used to live in that manor house, and she's found dead at the foot of the cliffs of the lighthouse, and of course Ari Thor and his former chief are investigating the murder, especially when it turns out that the young woman's mother and sister met a similar fate many years before. Finally, and this is a more festive one, a more Christmas themed one, is Murder on Christmas Eve, a collection of classic mysteries from a number of authors, from the sort of really golden age authors such as Chesterton and John Dixon Carr and Marjorie Allingham, to very modern ones like Ian Rankin and Val McDermid. So as with any such collection, it's a bit uneven. Some are less interesting than others, but on the whole it shows a great variety and a great diversity of Christmas stories, and the emphasis is very much on the mystery and puzzle aspect of it rather than on anything action or thrillery or ghostly oriented. So it really is quite a pleasant read, and makes a nice Christmas present for people who might not be yet converted to crime fiction and you'd like to convert them. So that's it on the Christmas theme. I'll tell you one thing that I am currently reading which seems to fit as well, because it brings you into an entirely different world. I know I've presented it before, Miklos Banfi, They Were Counted, but look, I'm now about halfway through it. And it's all about surrendering and entering that world of the Hungarian aristocracy in Transylvania, the parties, the sleigh rides, the balls, the dancing, description of the dresses, of the conversation, of the intrigues, adultery, and everything going on there, trying to marry off your daughters and so on. So in that respect, there's a combination of Jane Austen, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, Brideshead Revisited perhaps, or Le Grand Meulne. So it's really, it reminds me of a lot of other books, but it creates an atmosphere entirely its own. Perhaps somewhat reminding me of the Ringstraßenpalais TV series that was hugely popular in Austria in the 80s or so when I was a child. So yes, and entirely enchanting, but you have to have a lot of time and patience to read it and just wrap yourselves up in that world. So I wish you all a Merry Christmas, although it's quite early to say that yet, but I hope that that was a pleasant enough introduction to some Christmas reading.